Reggie here, and I want to welcome you to another installment of the top 10 most submitted books into CGC video. This is a video that I do every single month in which I run down those books that we are sending into CGC to essentially provide you with a leading indicator of what will eventually make its way out into the market. And without any further ado, let's get to the list. Number 10 on the list is Nice House on the Lake issue number 1 from James Tyan. It appears that it is the third print that's actually being sent in to CGC. And based upon the available data, we can see that there are roughly 140 copies of this third print on the CGC census, with a healthy number of them being a 9.8. A quick glance at eBay sold listings show that about 7 blue label copies of this book have exchanged hands since September at a price ranging from $275 to $220 in December. In addition to the blue label, there are 3 yellow label sales from roughly the same period, averaging a sales price of $343 for a 9.8. My guess is that this book is going to slide off the list starting next month, but only time will tell, because this is one of the only DC books that has consistently shown up throughout the course of this last year. Number 9 on the list is Venom Lethal Protector issue number 1, and at present there are more than 13,370 copies of this book on the CGC census across all grades. At a 9.8, which is the most abundant on the census, there have been roughly 2,600 sales. The current FMV for a 9.8 is $200, with a 1-year average price of $171, a 90-day average price of $173, and a 30-day average of $178. Despite this book's census count continuing to increase, this book is performing well in terms of its 1-year average versus its 30-day average at almost every single grade. In other words, this book is holding stable, which is really interesting given that there are so many copies out there and even more that are potentially headed towards CGC for grading. Number 8 on the list is Spags Universe issue number 1. Last month, the census count for this book was 597 copies, and this month it has increased to almost 700 copies, with the vast majority being either a 9.8 or a 9.6. There have been roughly 14 sales of a 9.8, ranging from as low as $30 in December to $55 in just the last few days. Go Collect has the book's 1-year average at $67 and the 30-day average $1 less than the 90-day average at $64. This is honestly one of those books that it might make more sense to pick up already graded versus having a raw copy and sending it in to CGC to be graded, given the cost for grading as well as the current turnaround times. Number 7 on the list is XMen issue number 1 from 1991. And as I've reported before, there is some wonkiness with this specific book, primarily because there were several different covers all released at essentially the same time. So it's difficult to tease out which of the covers is the one that is being sent in for grading. That wonkiness is enhanced by the way that the data is in the CGC census and also the way that the data is in Go Collect. So it's really difficult to tease out one cover from another cover. With that said, based upon what I can see, there are roughly 14,000 copies of this comic on the census. The 9.8 has an FMV of $120, a 1-year average of $127, a 90-day average of $123, and a 30-day average of $125. Like Lethal Protector, this book also appears to be pretty stable despite its high census count. Number 6 on the list is Amazing Spider-Man issue number 361, the first appearance of Carnage. This book continues its downward trend. The values are continuing to tumble. In fact, when you look at the data, what you see is that at every single grade, this book is selling for less than its FMV or its fair market value, and its 1-year average. The only exception is the 8.0, which has a 90 and 30-day average that is actually higher than the 1-year average. And to be honest with you, I'm not quite sure what is happening here with the 8.0. My guess is that we're going to see this grade also start to take a tumble in subsequent months if this book remains on the list. Number 5 on the list is Moon Knight issue number 1 from 2021. And as I've reported before, there is some confounding data with this book that makes it difficult to identify which of the more than 40 covers is the one that people are sending in to be graded. With that said, the most abundant covers that are being sent in come down to 2 books, starting with cover A, which presently has 570 total copies on the census. Next up is the Dale Otto variant that has 130 copies on the census. At a 9.8, cover A has a 30-day average price of $80 and the Dale Otto sits at $78. And honestly, at these prices, it potentially behooves us to maybe snag this book already graded versus buying a raw copy, taking a chance, sending it in to be graded given the prices for grading and also the current turnaround time. But at the end of the day, this is a judgment call that you'll have to make. Number 4 on the list is Moon Knight issue number 1, published by Marvel Comics in 1980. Last month, there were 6,154 copies of this comic on the CGC census, and now that number has grown by almost 400 copies to 6,548. This increase is actually less than what we saw the previous month, which was an increase of 554 copies. While smaller, we are still talking about roughly 950 copies of this comic that have found their way to CGC. My guess is that this number is going to continue to grow as the excitement around the Moon Knight TV show that's coming out continues to build. The other thing that I would add here is that all of this added attention is actually increasing the values of this comic as well. What we see is that at every single grade, the 30-day average for this comic is higher than both the 90-day average and the 1-year average, which tells us that the upward trend in prices may continue into the foreseeable future. Number 3 on the list is Spawn issue number 1 from the 90s, and at present there are 20,999 copies of this book on the CGC census, and one does not need a great imagination to know that that number is actually going to increase. People are going to continue sending Spawn in. But it's important to make note of a few things. At present, at every grade from a 9.2 up to a 9.9, the values of those comics, of those grades, are starting a downward trend. Now, what's interesting is that the 9.0 and below is actually trending upward. When you look at the 30-day average versus the 1-year average, those lower grades are actually either holding steady or increasing in value. It'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next few months with all of these numbers, whether they all go down or whether they all go up or hold steady. So definitely stay tuned to this series to see what happens with Spawn issue number 1. Number 2 on the list is Miles Morales Spider-Man issue number 30. And I want to shout out everyone out there that actually sent me a photo of what this BAM box exclusive cover actually looks like. Because for a couple of months there, I was talking about the book and had never seen it. And all of a sudden, when my last video came out last month, a ton of people started to send me photos. So I am very thankful that I now know what this comic actually looks like. At present, there are almost 700 copies of this variant on the CGC census, and almost every single copy is a yellow label signed by Tyler Kirkham. A healthy number of these books have traded hands, ranging in value from $75 to a high of $190. It'll definitely be interesting to see what happens to this book's value over the next few months. My guess is that because the BAM box is actually sold out, that we potentially will not see this book on the list in the future, but you never know what can happen. Number 1 on the list is Ultimate Fallout issue number 4, the facsimile edition. At present, there are 642 total graded copies of this book on the census, and according to Go Collect, 60 copies of this comic have traded hands. At present, the 9.8 has a 30-day average price of $76, which is actually trending upward after the book hit a low of $53. I will tell you that this book gives me a little pause. It gives me a little pause because the facsimile edition looks very similar to the regular edition. And on January 8th, there was a seller on eBay that actually sold the facsimile for $128. And part of the way that they promoted this was they identified that a movie was in the works, that this book was hot, and that this was an investment-worthy book. That gives me a little pause that if and when a Miles Morales movie is actually announced, we could see a flood of facsimile comics hitting the market, confusing people, and potentially there could be folks that get taken advantage of. That gives me a tremendous amount of pause, and maybe it does you as well. With that said, I'm actually going to wrap this video up, but before I do so, I want to remind you that if you have not picked up the Swoldier supply box, to do so today. The shipping date is right around the corner, but you still have a chance to get a copy if you head over to regiecollects.com. If you need to reach out to me, feel free to do so. And certainly if you enjoyed this series, please leave a comment down in the comment section and give the video a thumbs up. Take care.